Greetings again. I'm Ray Mofield, and this is the Oral History Program. Today, we're pleased to have as our guest Daniel Johnston. I don't know that I had ever met Mr. Johnston before. Perhaps I had, but I do know Riley Johnston, his brother, and I've interviewed him, and I've interviewed Bruce. How many brothers were there?
Two brothers, Ray, Riley here, and Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, had really two sisters. The older one, first one died at about 18 months, and then, of course, Marilyn, she's the youngest in the family, and my sister.
Okay,
So,
now your father's name was,
John Clarence Johnston.
and was he from Marshall County?
Yes, sir. He was from Marshall County. He was,
About what part of the county did he live in?
well, he lived, I guess, most of his entire life, and
Somewhere around Sharp, was it?
yeah, part of it was not too far from Sharp, on the old Sharp Bottom Road. Part of it was, and part of it was on the old George Clark Road, which connected State Highway 68 and Bottom Road.
Mm-hmm.
Lived there for quite some time.
Well, that road's still there. It got a big green white sign off of 68 saying
Yeah.
George Clark Road. I pass
Mhm.
that every now and then.
Yes.
And your mother, before she married,
Was Donnie Riley.
uh-huh.
And
So that put you kin to the Rileys, and
Yes.
that's where your brother Riley got his name, I
that's
suppose.
correct. Somebody suggested that they name him Riley after my mother's surname, and that's what they did.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, you were born in that general area yourself then, I guess.
Yes, I was born in a little two-room house on the old Benton Sharp Bottom Road, pretty near the old McCain schoolhouse. Is within sight.
So I guess you went there.
I went to McCain School for my elementary education, a one-room school, which most of them in that part of the country, I guess, did go there.
Well, I didn't go to McCain. I went to a one-room school. In fact, a couple of them over in Callaway County, one Blakely, one Stone.
Uh-huh.
But as you say, back in our generation, just about everybody that didn't live right in Benton went to a one-room country school.
Yes, that is right.
Now, were you weren't the baby? Were you the middle boy or the
I
oldest?
was the second in the family. The first child was a girl, and she died at, I believe, at about 18 months of age. And then I was the second. I am the oldest living one of the children right now.
I understand that you left this area, and then so you've been gone.
That is correct.
That'll give me a good chance to get your reaction to how things have changed since you remembered. Now, you lived here, what, about 25, 30 years?
That's correct, around 25 years before I got drafted into the service, and I wound up, well, to start, I went to Fort Riley, Kansas for basic training, and from there...
Well, you felt right at home at Riley, didn't you?
Yes, Fort Riley, about 100 miles west of Kansas City. Then after the basic training, of course, I was at Fort Riley when war declared, Pearl Harbor, December the 7th, 41.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't been there too long till it came a blizzard, and it was really cold, snowed, and you just simply, of course, Kansas is sort of a plain state, and that wind really blew. You couldn't see 20 feet ahead of you during the height of that storm, and you just simply couldn't get on enough clothes, apparently, to stay warm. So after my basic training, they shipped a small handful of us to Fort Brown, Texas, down on the Mexican border, right on the tip of Texas, just across from Matamoros, which is a town over in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got down there, we left that cold climate there in the Kansas. And people was going around the shirt sleeves, the grass was green, picking citrus off the trees.
Well, that made an impression on a gold Kentucky boy.
I said, that's for me. So actually, I've been around somewhere in that most of the time since then. But it did make an impression on me. I thought, well, everything looked subtropical climate, and it was what I thought was a pretty good deal. And I have, of course, been around down there most of the time since.
Mm-hmm. Well, very good. Now let's get you back into West Kentucky. And you were born about what year was it?
1915, September the 15th, 1915.
And so you would have started school in about 21 or so.
1922 was my first school. I was 7 years old.
Do you have any idea who your first teachers
Yes, I do. It was Miss Mattie Morrison.
Mm-hmm.
And I went my first 2 years to Mattie. And I went my last year to McCain, to Alva Dickey, which was a sister to Miss Mattie. So I went my first and last years to sisters, Miss Mattie and Alva.
Yeah.
Of course, there's some teachers in between.
Now, back in those days, they started school somewhere around the 1st of July, first Monday in July, I believe.
I believe that's about right about it's in July.
And you came pretty close to finishing up by Christmas.
Yes, usually a little after Christmas, sometime maybe January, I believe, was when 7 months school is what they had back then. Of course, once we got in high school, and of course later they combined some of the grades in high school, maybe to some degree, they had 9 months school, but when I went to the elementary school, it was 7 months.
What did you like best in school? Spelling, geography, arithmetic?
Well, I wound up that I kind of liked history. When I was in school, though, really I didn't so much, but I guess I seemed to get along fairly well on spelling at one time, but later on I got to liking history, and till today I still seem to have a liking for history. I've made up my mind that I was going to do a lot of traveling when I retired, and I've seen quite a lot of the country, and most of it's projected towards history, you know, the Old West and things like that.
Yeah. Well, you I guess your dad farmed.
Yes, sir, he was a farmer, truck farmer.
You didn't have to sucker tobacco and worm it.
I sure did.
Oh, you did?
I suckered tobacco and wormed it, and I don't think most people that did that, worked in tobacco, would, they probably wouldn't forget it, because it was the kind of work.
That was tough work.
Yeah, we didn't realize it then, maybe, but didn't know much different. But thinking back by today's standards, it was pretty rough going, working at tobacco.
Yeah, I remember. We got into it pretty young. When I was too little to do much, I'd drop plants.
Yeah, yes. Well, we dropped plants, and of course wound up by held it in the barn, and then taking it down, stripping it out, and taking it to the market, which they bid it off, use it to the highest bidder. Sometimes they'd buy it, some buyer would come around, buy it at the barn, and they didn't.
Now, where you lived, they probably took it to Paducah.
Paducah, that was the main sales floor. There was an odd time when maybe they took it to Hopkinsville or maybe Murray or somewhere else, but Paducah was the main market at that time.
Yeah, tell us some other things about. Did you have to go home early from school and work in the field?
We did on many occasions, yeah, and usually we'd go. A lot of times we didn't go home early, but we'd still have to work some after we got home. And then special little projects that came up and things that the parents wanted to get done, well, they'd want us to come in early and give them a little extra work there before the day was over.
Mm-hmm. Now then, in the wintertime, you were out of school most of January, February, all of February and March, and so you had to start and burn a plant bed. I guess. And,
yeah, those plant beds, they were burned long in January and February, sometime in March, I guess, but not later than that, and usually not that late. But, of course, that was quite a job, too. And then we just either put wood down and put brush on it and burned it, which burnt the ground, and I guess
Kill the weeds.
Kill the weeds. I guess the ashes, to some degree, was sort of a fertilizer.
Well, that gave them some potash.
Potash, right. And I guess later they got to using these pans and things, you know, maybe use burners and things like that. But but we just used wood and brush when we burnt the plant bed. And of course, we'd have to keep an eye out when the young seed sprouted. Put a canvas over it to keep the frost from getting the young plants when they first came through.
You probably get around the edge and pull the canvas back and sow a few tomato seeds.
Yeah, that's right. That was another thing.
We occasionally put a little lettuce along there.
Yes, we did. That also happened sometimes. Lettuce and tomatoes and maybe, I don't know, it could have been a few radishes and maybe another garden vegetable. I think
cabbage,
yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's almost exactly the way we got along. I guess all the people did that. Did you ever have to milk a cow?
Well, I have on occasion, but I guess fortunately, Dad, he did most of the milking. Maybe he just, I don't know, maybe he didn't want to train us, or we just didn't have much ambition maybe there. I don't know, but no, he did most of the milk. But I have milked, and I did know how to milk.
I guess your mother had a wood cook stove.
No, yeah, she did.
So you had to keep the stove wood box.
Stove wood was a problem, and
what about drawing water?
That was another thing that one had to constantly be at. The old well rope type deal where you let the bucket down the well and you roped it up on a pulley.
That could be pretty wild on a February day when it got 0.
Especially when your rope had got wet and froze, and maybe your bucket had even froze to the top of the well. You'd have to bang around on it to get it knocked loose. Yeah, you're right. It could be a problem.
Did you heat the house with a fireplace?
Well, yeah, we did originally used a fireplace. Of course,
that wasn't much heat, was it?
It was poor heat. You could burn up in front and freeze in the back, as the old saying used to be, because that heat mostly went up the chimney, and you didn't get much back in the room. But and it also took an awful lot of wood in cold weather to supply one of those fireplaces. But later we did get a stove, which was a pretty good step in the right direction, we thought at that time. And we sort of phased out the fireplace after a few years.
Now, what about some of the highlights of living in the country? You hog killing, let's say.
Yes, yeah, hog killing was one thing that I guess most people had at least anywhere from maybe a couple of hogs to some of them might have had several. And yeah, we had hog killings, and all the neighbors would come in, and I was saying maybe not all of them, but a good many of them would come in and they'd help the other one, and they'd swap work, and of course
swap a little bit of meat.
Swap meat.
We always got a liver at least.
Yes.
Or something like that out of killing.
Ribs, or sometimes you get a little tenderloin or something like that. But it was usually on a cold day when the weather seemed to, that's when days they usually would pick when the weather was real cold, so the meat would, well, I guess they didn't want the meat to spoil, and of course naturally they put it down in salt after it was cut up.
We didn't have electric power, no refrigeration, so you had to depend on natural cool air.
Natural cool air and salt for preserving it, and of course the hogs had to be scalded and cleaned, and then hung up on the scaffold, or on the board, or the poling. I guess you call it poling them. And of course take their insides out, and then take them down, and they'd cut them up. And of course there's a portion of that hog that they made sausage out of, and others it was cut up for lard, you know, the scraps, and they'd cook the render the lard from it. fatty
build a
parts.
big fire around about a 50-gallon black cast
That's
iron
right.
wash kettle.
Right, yes, that's right.
Stir that stuff, and then when you came up with cracklings, that made some pretty fair cornbread.
It did, and that was, I thought it was good in those days. I haven't eaten any of it in a long time, but if I had some good crackling bread, I could eat it right now.
You give her a try.
I would, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, did you ever take a turn of corn to mill?
Yes, we took corn and wheat too sometimes to the mill. I don't, I maybe Marley Roundtree Sharp might have ground corn. I know he ground wheat and made flour,
Mm-hmm.
but there's another old timer up on the Sharp Bottom Road, the name of Phelps, Clayt Phelps. He was a rather comical old man, but he did have a mill with some burrs there, and he ground cornmeal, and we'd go up there sometimes with shell corn to have meal made of it, and sometimes I guess a lot of the times we'd pay a little toll
Mm-hmm.
of the corn rather than to pay the cash.
Yeah.
But
They just kept a little bit
kept
of the meal.
kept a bit on the
You
meal.
had no money change hands.
Right, yeah.
What about, were you ever at a wheat thrashing?
Yes, we worked, we didn't grow, on a few occasions we had a little bit of wheat, but we never did grow too much wheat. But the thrasher would come through there for a few years, and of course it'd thrash the neighborhood wheat. They would stop at one place, maybe they'd have several loads, and then they'd go to the next place and just continue on till they got it all in the neighborhood. But it was the old type thrasher, of course, where you had those old binders that would, or some maybe, I guess they did a little cradling around the stumps and fence rows, tie the wheat up yourself when you cradle it, take it off the fingers of the cradle, and then, of course, they had the old horse-drawn binder, which they used some.
They'd shock that. And
Chalk it up, and
then you had to haul it into the thresher.
yes, they had a kind of a frame that they put on the wagon. They'd put these bundles of wheat on there, and then they'd have to, of course, throw it into the separator there, which was pulled by a tractor, or sometimes, I guess the first ones I remember was a steam engine. But later they had tractors that they used to pull the separators. And it was also at a hot time of the year, and something like some of the tobacco work was, and it was quite a job to get that run through the thrasher. And
The only good thing I remember about wheat thrashing was that the women worked as hard as the men. They got in the kitchen and cooked around those wood stoves, but they would fix up a meal that I came to know as a wheat thrashing dinner.
That's right. They
That is all you could eat.
yes, and they didn't run short of any various kinds of vegetables and meat and so forth. It was they had good dinners.
We'd have fresh corn about that time, and of course cabbage and green beans and peas and
Yes,
everything you can think of that grew in the garden.
that's right.
Plenty of fresh tomatoes.
Yes,
Oh, those were wonderful days in some ways, and yet, as you say, it was an awfully hot time of the year.
it was. They were some of the people that worked that wheat, of course, dealing mostly with Marshall County, but some of them went out in some of the western states and hard out, in the wheat harvest. Sometimes.
I've heard of a lot of
Right.
young unmarried men especially
They did.
they'd follow that harvest clear up into North Dakota.
They would, up into the main, of course, up in the main wheat belt. You get out there in Kansas on north.
Yeah.
But
Did you ever make any of those?
no, I never made any of those western tours there, that is, during the wheat harvest. But I did, some of them did.
Well, we've talked about harvesting wheat. We've talked about killing hogs and so on. Did you ever have to help your mother on wash day?
Oh, yes.
What did you do on a day like that?
Well, one thing, of course, we had back then they boiled the clothes in one of those black kettles that you mentioned there a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in a lot of cases, in our cases, always a problem getting out and getting in a little wood. We didn't seem to usually think too far ahead on that, so you just have to get out and drag in a little brush sometimes, or cut it up for washwood to heat the kettle with. So that was one of our chores as a boy. And then I have helped do a little bit of washing on occasion, but not too much. Of course, my mother did most of that.
What did you use for soap?
We used what you call lye soap.
And that was homemade.
Homemade soap. They made, again, we're going back to the hog killing days.
Mm-hmm.
They kept out some of that grease, and they'd add Marywar lye or some other type lye to it, and they'd make soap, lye soap. Now, some of the maybe earlier days, or I remember a little bit, but about it, before they used lye soap so much, you had that old wood ashes soap, the old ash hopper.
You keep your ashes and stack it up in a hopper and pour water in it, and
yes,
and that produced homemade lye.
Homemade lye, and they'd make soap out of that. Put a little grease in it and work it out. But I think my grandparents did, but I never knew of my mother. She usually just used the lye soap type. You know, you bought the lye and put in.
Well, that's true of my mother. Now, I remember my great-grandfather, Hal Edwards, he and his wife made homemade, and I've seen that ash hopper there.
Yeah.
But my mother always bought at the store. You can get a can of Marywar lye. It seemed to me it cost only about a dime.
Oh, it's cheap, yeah. It sure was. And I don't know what the mixtures were. I don't remember now, but that's a little bit of that lye went a pretty long ways. I know you put that in that water and it'd get hot and
sure,
put it.
The steam would fly up,
right,
sort of foam around.
It's powerful stuff.
You didn't want any of that in your eyes.
No, you better stand clear. And then, of course, it'd get that grease in there, and after it sat there a while, it'd cool off, and then that's when they'd take it and cut it up, and make chunks of soap out of it.
In the fall now, did you go hickernut hunting?
Oh, yes, we did that.
There maybe were still chestnuts when you were
Well, not too many. In part of the country where we was at, I know there was a few trees around, but it's mostly hickornuts and maybe a few walnuts. But
what about possum grapes?
Yeah, there were some possum grapes. They were not. There was one kind of grape there that they call it. I think a little bit superior to what we call the possum grape. It's a little bit bigger.
Muscadine?
Something on the order of that. But they're a little sweeter. But we did eat those possum grapes and also the others. And sometimes some of the people would get them and make wine out of them. Sometimes we never did make too much of that wild grape wine, but some of the people would.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're getting on down to we just have about 6-7 minutes left. I don't want to omit your. Did you marry?
Yes, I've been.
Let me ask you about your wife then.
All right. Going back to where I first started, and wound up in Brownsville, Texas, in the military service. And I met a girl in Brownsville, and I married her in 1944, January 44. And I had two youngsters, Sandra and Danny, by name. But my wife died in 1958, so I was only married to her about 13 years, plus is 2 years, I believe, that, or not quite 2, I guess 15 months that time, I was overseas.
Mm-hmm.
So I was only married to her about 13 years. But she died in 1958. And then about 1970, of course, tragedy struck, and the boy, he got killed in a hunting accident.
Oh, my.
And
so
before
you had any grandchildren?
Yes, And my daughter, of course, she grew on up and finished university and college, and married a fella in Brownsville, David Leal, and they wound up in Houston, which they're living in Houston right now, and they have two little youngsters. Well, not little now; they've grown up now. The boy Trey, he's about 15, I believe. No, he's 14. Take that back. And Nina, the girl's 12.
How far are you from them?
About 360 miles south.
Well, it's a good long ways,
Yeah.
but you can get to see them once in a while.
Of course, I was, and during part of that time, of course, the youngsters were born after I got back out of military service. I was in military service for 4 years. I don't know if it's okay to refer to that right now or not.
Sure.
I guess.
Whatever you want to say.
Well, I mean, you know, but anyway, I thought maybe you might have had some other questions you wanted to ask. But anyway, I was in Brownsville, Texas, for about 2.5 years on sort of border patrol.
Mm-hmm.
And we was patrolling the Mexican border a little bit, and then went overseas in a horse cavalry outfit. You know, it's the reason I got training there at Fort Riley, Kansas, is a horse cavalry training center. And
we still utilized that in World War II, didn't we?
To some degree, but they didn't serve much in combat. But then I went to Burma and India and China, and on the old Burma Road during the campaign against the Japs, the outfit was.
Mm-hmm.
And we...
Vinegar Joe Stillwell.
He was the man. He was over there when I first went over there, Joe was.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, they took our horses away from us and sent mules over there, pack animals, and we had to lead them around over those trails along that old Burma Road and various other places. The Japs had that in possession for, so I guess 2 or 3 years, and they dug in pretty well there. But anyway,
in some places, that's about the only way you could carry much cargo.
Right, on those mules, they could carry. Well, they carried all the cargo really that we used, kitchen equipment and mortars and I guess artillery up to about 75 millimeter. Of course, we had to carry some of the. They'd carried ammunition and kitchen supplies and so forth. And that was rugged country in there, and sometimes one of those old mules would fall off the trail, and you might as well just kiss him goodbye if he did. He might wind up about a half a mile down below, and you might just forget him. He wouldn't even go down there. Sometimes probably might have killed him anyway. I don't know, over some of those rugged trails. But
you're getting in the edge of the Himalaya
Mountains.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. We flew over what they call the hump.
Oh,
getting
that's
over
terrible,
there.
wasn't it?
Back then it was. It had those old planes that didn't have pressurized cabins and cold, and old C-47s, and sometimes they didn't have any door on them. And
wasn't that just sort of a souped-up version of the old DC-3?
It was.
Yeah.
It was. But we stayed there for quite a while in Burma, and of course by that time the war, while I was in Burma, the war with Germany was over, and it was getting pretty close to an end with Japan. They was getting about ready to drop those atomic bombs. And
August of 45.
That's correct. I'd sort of forgotten the date, but that's when it was. Anyway, a few of them began to get out on that point system.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody was counting up their points and wishing they had a few more, and you got points for maybe your children, and then you got points for campaigns you were in and the time you'd spent in the service. But they didn't seem to get around to some of us very fast, even if you had enough points.
Mm-hmm.
So one old boy, I say one old boy, I guess there's several of them that's disgruntled about it, but complaining every day, but he went out and found an old Japanese skull. Now, of course, it wasn't hard to find a Japanese skull around there sometimes, because sometimes they didn't bury their dead, or maybe they couldn't, I don't know, didn't go to too much trouble. He got that old skull, and he nailed it up over his tent door, and he wrote a sign put down on it, said, "This man waited for rotation." So that was that's a comical story, but it was truth. I remember that.
That's worth the broadcast right there.
Yeah.
Well, we're down to just about a minute or so. Have you got any special stories?
Well, I might just one little short one. I've done quite a bit of traveling since I retired. that was my ambition when I retired, to see part of the world. And so far, I've been in every state in the United States except Hawaii. I say I, my wife and I. And every province in Canada. And we did some travel in Europe, mostly the British Isles. But I've enjoyed it. But one little thing that I'm thinking of right now stands out in my mind is once when we was visiting in Moncton, New Brunswick, which is the capital of New Brunswick. It's one of the maritime provinces of Canada. There's a place there they call Magnetic Hill. And it's quite an attraction there for tourists. Actually, it's an optical illusion. You go there and look, and you